So I would like to say hello and welcome to our latest webinar in the Northern Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District weekly webinar series. My name is Ashley Palmer and I'm the Conservation Education Specialist with the district. This webinar is being recorded and it'll be available on our Facebook page and also on our website. If you have any questions for our presenter today, Maria, you can enter those at any time in the chat box and I'll be sure that she gets those when it's time for questions. If you're new to WebEx, you can find the chat box along your bottom menu. It looks like a little speech bubble, so you can click on that and access the chat box. Please feel free to share why you joined us today or what interests you about rain gardens. Maria will be able to see that while she's presenting. The Northern Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District is a self-governing advisory agency with diverse in-house expertise in the area of conservation of natural resources. Some of our tasks include reviewing document-related applications, conducting watershed management environmental education programs such as stream monitoring, and other public presentations like the one we have today on rain gardens. Our speaker today, Maria Harwood, is an urban conservation specialist for the Northern Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District and is excited to talk to you today about rain gardens. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to Maria.
Great. Thanks so much for that introduction, Ashley. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to go into a little bit about what is a rain garden. We're going to keep it light with a brief, broad overview. If you really want to know more nitty gritty and you're at the end of this presentation, you're ready to get out there and dig, we've got a great resource slide at the end that has other PDFs, videos, and things that can really help you get outside and start digging. So we're just going to go ahead and start with our background on what's a rain garden. Let me advance my slide here. One moment. Okay. So for those of you who are joining us that maybe aren't as familiar with our organization, Ashley just gave a quick background, but just to reiterate again, our position in the landscape, because it is important to understanding why we're talking about rain gardens and these other stormwater best management practices. So Northern Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District, although we have the name of Northern Virginia, years ago in 71, we used to incorporate the localities of Prince William and Loudoun, as well as Fairfax County. Today, we just primarily serve the residents of Fairfax County. Prince William and Loudoun County both have their own individual soil and water conservation districts. So as Ashley said, we're a political subdivision of the Commonwealth of Virginia. So we were established all the way back in 1945. And this image on the right-hand side of the screen, Ashley, can they see my pointer as I move it around? I guess that's a good thing to ask.
Yes, we can. We can see that.
Okay. Okay, great. Thanks. So this schematic on the right-hand side, this big, bold red outline, is showing the watershed of the Chesapeake Bay. So here we've got the Chesapeake Bay, and it's showing how many states in all of this land area. Us, like we just said, in Fairfax County in Northern Virginia, we're right here, right outside of Washington, D.C. But as we'll understand about watersheds a little bit more, this is a whole bunch of land area, lots of different states, parts of Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, Pennsylvania, New York, and the District of Columbia are all part of this watershed. So as we understand a little bit more about the health of the Chesapeake Bay and how we can work towards that, rain gardens are possibly one way that we can help the Chesapeake Bay be cleaner. We also need to understand that we've got lots of different actors, lots of different states that all need to individually take actions towards the health of the Chesapeake Bay. So again, a little more our background about our district. We are non-regulatory and advisory. So we give lots of this technical assistance and webinars like Ashley talked about, educational programs, volunteer opportunities, all of those things, trying to work again, like we talked about the health of the Chesapeake Bay, trying to work towards cleaner water quality and preventing non-point source pollution into our streams. Here are two images. Now we're dialing in a little bit more. We saw that large watershed of the Chesapeake Bay, and a definition of a watershed is the area of land that all drains to one common body of water. So that Chesapeake Bay watershed, we talked about how it's really large and incorporated a bunch of states. Here we are broken down into smaller and smaller. You can break watersheds into smaller and smaller increments. So these are some of the major watersheds of Fairfax County that are on this screen. And these are two different maps that show two different ways of depicting it. So this one actually has the watersheds divided up, and it shows the elevation or relief. So these grayer areas are those high peaks in our county, and then these lower lying areas are these lighter green. Over here, it's a similar way of seeing these watersheds, except it's just highlighting the actual stream valleys and channels themselves. So Fairfax County overall, we're almost just about 400 square miles, and we have over 1,600 miles of streams and channels. So we are this complex web of streams and channels that all interweave what happens on our land and how we're using our land, the land use, what we do in our own backyards can affect the water quality in these streams and watersheds, and then ultimately, like we talked about, the Chesapeake Bay, because that's eventually where all of our water ends up. So I just wanted to pull everybody in for a moment. If you can figure out that chat box, like Ashley said, just to engage for a moment to check back in, what is a rain garden? So if you wanted to pull up that chat bubble again, and we'll just ask for a simple yes or no. If you would like to participate, have you heard of a rain garden before this presentation? Just want to gauge the background. We've got some yeses coming in. So we've got some pretty educated folks. That's awesome. Um, and thank you, Ashley, for helping moderate some of those chat questions. Great. So we've got some really well-educated folks about rain gardens today. So lots of yeses. You've heard about them before. And some folks are chiming in that they know rain gardens involve native plants that thrive with natural precipitation. Um, so we've got a lot of people that have heard of the term rain garden. Is there one or two words? I invite you into the chat box again. What do you think of when you hear the term rain garden? What does that make you think of? Anybody wants to throw a little bit? Okay, we've got some folks saying runoff and runoff containment. Anybody else? Anything that pops into your mind? Reducing stormwater and water pollution, clean water, great. A place where puddles happen naturally, clean water. Gathering rain. Wow, you guys are great. All really, really well informed. Can also serve as a pollinator garden. Great. We will talk about all of these things. Um, thanks so much for participating. So here we've got, those were great answers. We've got really well-informed people on our presentation today. So here's just a little very basic schematic from the State Association of Soil and Water Districts to help you jog your mind when you're thinking about rain gardens. It's this landscaped depression, a bowl-shaped depression that can hold precipitation, and as some people said, filled with natural plants. So we want to capture that runoff from our rain, let it slow down, filter out, and recharge our groundwater. So again, what is a rain garden? Some folks, when they think about rain gardens, might think of really, really wet, like situations like a pond right here. But I want you to keep in mind, we'll talk about this later, why you also might want to think about desert-like conditions or pretty dry conditions. So the name rain garden always makes us think, of course, of the water and the stormwater that it's meant to capture and clean, but we're also going to consider later on talk about why do we also need to think about dry conditions and why is that important. So again, what is a rain garden? A definition, landscape depression. It temporarily captures, slows down, and filters rainwater. Um, this is a great profile here from the Watershed Stewards Academy. Again, we'll have lots of resource links at the end of this presentation. But this shows all the different parts of what a typical rain garden could look like. So we have stormwater runoff. It can come, as this schematic talks about, from a roof or a driveway. So those hard, impervious surfaces, and that water can come into our rain garden. It's meant to capture. The ponding depth is how much during a rainstorm how much water is going to fill up. So again, it's a bowl-shaped depression. So water is going to temporarily pond or fill up this surface. We keep a little bit of mulch on top to try and keep the weeds down, among other things. And the key to understanding rain gardens is the soil underneath. And we really want a well-draining soil because we're directing lots of runoff, lots of water to this area. So we want a really permeable soil medium below the surface. So we'll talk about whether you need to possibly remove and replace your soil if your soil naturally isn't really well draining, or if it is well draining, you can just amend it with a little bit of extra compost and go ahead and plant. And we do encourage using native plant species. What happens when we get too much rainfall? Well, we need to think about an overflow because there will always be a bigger storm event. So while we design these and we size them pretty specifically to take a certain amount of runoff, we're not going to make these big enough to capture all the rainfall events. That's not practical, so we need to think about what happens when this gets too full. Where is that water going to go? And try to protect our overflow a little bit. Okay, so here's a great image in action of a rain garden. So we've got a downspout, if you can see it just here on the side, which is bringing roof runoff. And it's going in through this channel, this hardened inflow channel to try and protect this area from scour and slow down the water before it gets into the main basin of our rain garden here, filled with wonderful blooming native flowers. So what do rain gardens do? Um, they're meant to capture the stormwater runoff. So again, that's the water that's coming off of our hard or impervious surfaces like streets, driveways, and rooftops. They can also capture water that's running over land from maybe a turfed area, an area in grass. Um, Predominantly, we do want to make sure we've got lots of runoff coming to these rain gardens. They can take a lot of water, so having downspouts that are directly connecting into the rain garden, say from your roof and your gutters, are really important things to think about. So overall, these facilities are meant to reduce the flow of stormwater coming from those hard surfaces. So we want to capture and let some of that stormwater infiltrate rather than just running off into our nearest storm drain or into the stormwater conveyance system, which then eventually goes to our local waterways. Again, we're part of that watershed, our position in the watershed. So by capturing this water, and letting it filter in. Our aim is to recharge the groundwater, and that groundwater flow is really important um, for the health of our streams and our waterways. That groundwater becomes the base flow of our streams in droughty or dry conditions. Um, so it's important in our urban, suburban areas where we paved a lot of surfaces for us to drive on and roofs, things where we live. We've really disrupted this hydraulic cycle and the processes of recharging the groundwater because we've paved over so much. So we really need to find and focus on areas where we can capture this water and recharge it. So these practices in general, rain garden is the type of this practice is a stormwater best management practice or stormwater BMP. So we're using these again to try and reduce the quantity and clean the stormwater before it escapes and goes into our local waterways. So uh, as you can see, this is a beautifully planted rain garden. It can also enhance the beauty of our landscape. Somebody in the chat also talked to us about how these gardens can support pollinators and our local wildlife. Okay, we just talked about the connection of our position in the landscape to our local area streams. So this diagram from EcoCity Alexandria is trying to help remind us that only rain should go down the storm drain. This is going to show us a few different types of pollutants. We have another webinar recording, a great recording by Ashley, where she talked about our Enviroscape model, and she went into great depth about the sources of pollutants in our landscape um, and what we can do to clean up. So right now we're talking about one of those ways. The rain garden is a way that we can help prevent stormwater pollution. There's also other methods and techniques out there. So this is showing, again, our urban and suburban areas where we've paved a lot. We have a lot of these hard surfaces like roofs, driveways, and streets for us to walk and drive on. Well, when it rains, the water can't soak into those areas. So there's going to be pollutants on those surfaces, like maybe pet waste that wasn't picked up, litter from overflowing trash cans, or maybe carelessly discarded waste. Um, if we're over applying things like fertilizer or not applying fertilizer, we should always get a soils test before applying fertilizer to make sure we're using the right amount that our grass needs. Um, Other things, leaky cars, motor oils, and chemicals, all of those things, when it rains, again, when it rains, it drains. So off all of these sloped surfaces, the storm water is going to wash away those pollutants and it's going to go to our nearest into um, the stormwater system. And the system is a series of pipes that discharge directly to our stream. Inside our homes, the water from our toilets or the water from our sinks, many of us are tied into the wastewater system. So that's a separate system of pipes, and that water goes to a treatment plant and gets filtered very well before it gets released back into the stream. Our stormwater system for the most part, does not get filtered out. So that's why it's so important to really take a look at what we're doing around our homes and our land use, what we're doing, because that all affects the health of our watersheds and our water quality that we all live in. So again, this polluted stormwater runoff flows directly to our local streams, the Potomac River, and eventually the Chesapeake Bay. All right. So how do we know what parts of a rain garden there are? We talked a little bit at the start. Um, Again, it's pretty important to make sure we are tying in directly those those hard impervious surfaces to our rain garden because we're designing these areas to take a good bit of stormwater runoff. So while they can get the overland flow or stormwater that's running off maybe our turfed areas, if you can site these in your landscape close to the downspouts, tying those in, um, or other hard surfaces like driveways and sidewalks and those things. Uh, that's really the main function, is to take the water runoff from those hard surfaces. And we're not going to talk about it in this webinar, but yes, you're definitely welcome to ask questions. I can try to answer them as I'm going along, or I can get to them at the end. But if anything is unclear, please go ahead and ask questions. Um, there's a few things to think about when we want to site the rain gardens in our landscape when we're looking around our homes. There's some areas that are better to have them and some areas that are worse off. Because the whole function of these is to be recharging the groundwater, letting this water soak into the soil and the ground beneath. We want to make sure that we're not putting them really close to, say, a basement or another foundation. So we try to have them a minimum of 10 feet from, if we have a basement or another subgrade structure. If you just have a home that's on, a slab foundation, you can reduce that from 10 feet to about 5 feet. But again, the soil acts like a wonderful sponge to soak up all of the stormwater runoff. So we want to make sure as it's soaking that water up, it's not going to be pulling it back and getting too close to the foundation of our home. There's other issues to consider as well when you're putting these. You want to always, of course, call Miss Utility before you start digging. I believe that number is 811, and they can come out and mark the area. So always avoiding the utility complex is really safe. Um, Finding an area with well draining soil. So we talked about either this amended soil that's down here, or maybe you can use a soil replacement. And let me try to take a quick look at this. Has a much deeper ponding depth. Is that okay? That is definitely okay. This one is showing 6 inches. It can be 6 inches to a foot or even a greater depth, a foot or even 2 feet. So a larger ponding depth just means it's going to be able to take and hold more stormwater. Around our home landscapes, we like to keep these, I would say, about 6 inches to a foot deep. Not too deep because you can get really steep sides and other issues with kind of safety and things if you make them really deep. Um, The rain gardens we're referring to right now are homeowner sort of backyard applications. The footage of them, or the footprint in our landscape, could be about 100 square feet or 150 square feet. Mainly, we're going to keep these under 200 square feet of space. And that can take a large part of all of our roof runoff, just keeping it under 200 square feet of a rain garden. Um, I saw a note pop in here about soil testing and percolation. Um, the larger sized rain gardens, like you might see at a facility, I think somebody was referencing a nature center, those can be upscaled or oversized, and those are typically called bioretention basins. Um, so those are larger engineered um, facilities to really design to take a lot more runoff than sort of our backyard homeowner rain garden. Some of these rain gardens that we're talking about, some do-it-yourself homeowners have installed them, even in their own backyard, um, without the help of a contractor. The bioretention basins are larger and deeper, and you really need some heavy machinery and equipment Some people also hire contractors to build their rain gardens as well. There's a very important note in the chat about your soil type in your area. So that is going to be key for any of these infiltration-based types of stormwater practices. So our rain gardens or our dry wells, they are all relying on the ability of this underlying soil to be able to soak up the water. Some areas around the county, especially if you're really close to a stream, they're not going to be great areas to install a rain garden because we want to make sure that we've got enough depth of soil for all of the pollutants to be able to adequately filter through the soil before they reach that groundwater. If you're really close to a stream, your groundwater is going to be very high and close to the surface. Um, so there's more in depth. Some of the resources at the end talk about looking at the soil maps and doing an infiltration test. But that's absolutely the first step beyond looking at your setbacks, making sure you're away from utilities, roofs, other conflicts, basements, other conflicts like that. Is my area going to um, be able to take this water? So, doing an infiltration test, we have a guide on our website how to do that. You're basically digging a hole and filling it with water, and then timing the amount of time that it takes for that water to go down. And that will tell us the ability of our soils to infiltrate a lot of water. So if our soils are not, if they don't take the water down at a pretty fast rate, we're going to end up with a pond. If you remember, I had that slide of sort of a pond image and a desert image. Well, we want to make sure these rain gardens drain within 24 to 48 hours. So they're going to be, normally they drain really quickly, um, in under 24 hours, even within a few hours of a storm event, because we have this amended soil in here. So once you do that infiltration test and you see if your soil is well draining, if it is, you can just mix up some compost to add a little bit extra more well draining material into there. If you don't have, if it's your water slow to go out of that hole that you did for that infiltration test, you can have the option of swapping and replacing your soil, taking out the native soil and using a soil replacement mix. So this is, you can get them from local area landscape garden centers. A lot of them have them. They're going to be freer draining soil that has a pretty high amount of sand in it. So again, we don't want this water to sit and pond for a long time. We really want it to be able to soak in quickly. Let me see if we had a few chat boxes, comments.
We've actually had a lot of questions, Maria. If you want to
Okay.
continue, we can answer those at the end since we do get some more questions, or you can answer them as you go. But we are really interested in your presentation. We have a lot of questions.
Okay, we've got some more pretty technical ones about a fast rate, or when I was talking about the infiltration. So, an infiltration rate of an inch or greater per hour when you do that infiltration test. Then you can just amend the soils that are there. You don't need to remove and replace. If you have an infiltration rate that's between an inch or half of an inch, that's a little bit slower draining, and you might want to consider removing and replacing this soil. If your soil is draining at less than half an inch per hour, um, it really might not be a great practice for your area. Instead of doing a rain garden, you might just want to consider adding some more native plants into your landscaping and other things like that. There are, again, we talked about bioretentions, which are these larger, more engineered structures. If you have a slow rate, say less than half an inch per hour of infiltration, You can install things like under drains that are these pipes that go along the bottom to try and drain those bioretention basins in an appropriate amount of time because there aren't good draining soils. So those are a little bit more engineered. Um, Running a downspout underground to the rain garden is absolutely appropriate. Here it does show it on the surface. You can absolutely run it underground, and I've seen some folks use those pop-up emitters that come in to the bottom of the rain garden. Using a little bit of rock material around that pop-up emitter might be a good idea, again, just to try and prevent a little bit of scour. Let's try and move along a little bit. Um, Actually, we'll go back 1 second. Again, talk about that overflow. There's always going to be a larger storm. So you want to think about once this area fills up, where is that excess water going to go? Making sure it's not discharging to a dangerous location, trying to avoid conflicts with downhill neighbors. Again, trying to look, you don't want to direct these towards homes or foundations or all those other things where there might be potential conflicts sending water in that direction. So an overland area that's in turf. So again, hopefully we can soak in a little bit more of that water after it overflows and slow it down if we get too much or too big a storm. So this schematic we're going to talk, we do promote the use of native plants in these rain gardens. Here again, I said, remember, keep that image in your mind of really wet and really dry. The term rain gardens, I think sometimes does us a little bit of a disservice because we're thinking, typically when you think of rainfall, you're thinking of these really, really wet areas all of the time. Well, I want to make sure you think about rain gardens in the extremes because they can be really, really wet during a storm event, but then they can also be really dry locations as well because we have either amended the soil, adding in more compost or a little bit of sand material, or maybe we removed and replaced the soil, took our native soils out and brought in a mix that has a lot of sand in it, so it's going to be more freer draining. That is going to be really tough on the plants. So again, looking at these extremes, really wet and really dry, we don't want to put in plants that you would typically see in a wetland because they like their feet wet all of the time. These rain gardens, like we said, are going to draw down. The rainwater is going to dissipate and go away within 24 to 48 hours. Typically, they drain within a very short amount of time, hours even after a rain event. So that resulting high mix of sand in the soil can be really tough on the plants. So understanding we have this dichotomy, we don't want to use plants that are just strictly for moist or wet areas. Using middle of the road plants, and our native plants typically are a little bit hardier. We have two resources here, and I see in the chat box, thanks Ashley, she put some more up. The Plant Nova Natives campaign, plantnovanatives.org, is a great resource to go and discover what plants are locally or regionally native to our area. The nativeplantcenter.net as well is a website by the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay, and they've taken this PDF, which is a wonderful PDF, Native Plants for Wildlife Habitat and Conservation Landscaping within the Chesapeake Bay watershed. They've taken this PDF. You can download that PDF there, but they also have it as sort of a searchable plant application there. So you can look at sun or shade or all those different things, which are really important to think about when you're citing plants. Speaking of shade, that reminds me of one conflict when you're thinking about where in my landscape can I put a rain garden. We want to avoid areas where we have really big trees because they're going to have an extensive root system, which is going to be hard to dig through. Those trees also do a ton for us for mitigating our stormwater runoff. They are wonderful best management practices themselves. So we want to give them space, let them keep doing what they're doing, and make sure we're not digging down and disturbing the root system. So a general rule of thumb, if you want to try and stay away from your large trees, if you're standing under the tree looking up and at the canopy, there's the drip line. So if in a big rainstorm, the area outside the canopy to the very edge is where that drip line is. So a rough estimation is to try and stay outside of the canopy of those trees um, to give it space to grow and thrive. So again, thinking of we promote the use of native plants, staying away from invasive plants. Invasive plants are ones that can grow really vigorously. They can outcompete other vegetation and they can create monocultures or just blankets of one type of species. And we like to promote biodiversity, a wide range. As you see here, different types of native plants for different pollinators. They might bloom at different times of the year, which is really important when we're considering habitat for our local natives. We want to make sure we have continual bloom throughout all of the seasons. That's really important to feed our pollinators. All wonderful things. I love the Plant Nova Natives website. As we're talking about pollinators, they have a wonderful chart that talks about our native plants and it talks about the season of bloom and it has it broken down by different months. So if you really want to make sure you have this continual, um, not just for the pollinators, but even for ourselves to see things blooming throughout the season continually, to try and have something blooming at all times just for our own um, yard beautification. They have a great chart um, on their website. All right. And it's in the name again, right? Maintenance. It's a garden, rain gardens. So um, maybe you're not a homeowner who gardens as extensively. Um, there are different ways where you can design your rain gardens to be a little bit lower maintenance. So if you um, aren't so much a gardener, or you can always have somebody else maintain these areas for you. Of course, um, if you don't have garden beds or things that you take care of in your yard, these areas are going to be really similar to that. So weeding, once we've planted the plants, we really want to make sure that we're watering them well until these plants are established. Um, So keeping an eye on it, especially we talked about how wet and how dry these situations can be because we've made the soils more freer draining. Really keeping an eye if we have a drought and watering those plants until establishment, which I know sounds a little bit funny that you're watering your rain garden, but again, very important to do to get those plants situated, get them a strong root system, so then they can themselves grow big enough to withstand those droughty periods. Um, Weeding, of course, like any normal garden, keeping some mulch cover down uh, if you're somebody who doesn't like to do as much maintenance, I talked about that you could design it a little bit differently. So thinking about native plants, this example here has a lot of, I think this is just a conservation landscaping, but we can pretend it's rain garden. They've used a lot of herbaceous flowering plants. So I think it's got a backbone here of some shrubs or different woody species like trees or shrubs. Typically, the trees and shrubs are lower maintenance options than our perennial beds using these herbaceous material. So if you're a homeowner that says, want a little bit more of a hands-off once these areas are established, maybe think about primarily using shrubs in your rain garden rather than a lot of these herbaceous flowering plants because they will take a little bit more time and care until the plants grow large enough to really um, block out a lot of those weeds. Um, Not only is a rain garden, thinking about our maintenance, just a garden where you have to weed. Again, we're directing lots of water to these areas. So those inflow and those overflow areas, we want to check them after large storm events, especially once we just first create these areas to make sure we're not getting any erosion in those areas. So again, those inflow and those overflow areas, we can reinforce them with a little bit of rock material just to try and slow down that stormwater runoff as it comes in. Um, if there's excessive amounts of leaves in the fall, um, these areas, because they are depressions, they can collect a lot of things. So we want to make sure that they don't get completely smothered by leaves. Some leaves piled on is okay, and it can help. It's a great area for overwintering bugs. Also, if you have more of those perennial species like those grasses or herbaceous flowering plants, you can leave that over the winter and then in the late winter, February or early March, go ahead and cut those back. So, as this notes here, a high winter wildlife value for leaving those plants in place over the winter time. It might be aesthetically a little bit different of an image that you're used to. You might, in the fall, as you're tidying up your leaves and other things, cut back those perennials. But changing our mindset a little bit, understanding why it might be important to leave some of that um, dead standing plant material for a local wildlife and the insects that we have. So maybe trying to get used to a little bit more of that look over the winter and not rush around in the fall and cut all of that. Uh, you can delay that maintenance a little bit. Keeping an eye, of course, when you're weeding, if there are any invasives um, in the uh, that come in. Again, invasive plants are ones that can colonize, they can take over really quickly. So trying to make sure none of those are in there because they could really wreak havoc and grow over all the plants that you so lovingly selected and are taking care of. Um, we talked about the inflow where that water is coming in, either if you've got a downspout overground or if maybe you've got it as a pop-up emitter. Also, if there's areas of driveways and other things in the winter time where you might be applying sand, because if there's icing, that sand can run off and that sand can clog maybe the inflows or even clog the rain garden. So making sure excess sediments don't get into your rain garden because again, we want these soils to be freely draining. That's giving that water a chance to really get into the ground quickly. So if you've got all the sediment that's accumulated on the top layer, sometimes it can seal off the rain garden and not let it drain freely. That's okay. Like we said, there's a ton of resources out there for any style of learner. Everything from YouTube videos about how to install a rain garden, a maintenance manual. This has really in-depth maintenance about rain gardens, um, fact sheets. If you really say you're ready to go out and dig right now, and you like learning with more webinars, um, this one is a link where we've got more in depth on how to you're ready to put the shovel in. How do you measure how much roof area you have? How big a footprint do you need your rain garden to be? A little more exactly about some native plants. We list some different native species that do really well and more in-depth maintenance and just pictures overall. So this is a great resource, this webinar as well. Um, this website from NVRC has a ton of resources from this webinar. So it has PDF images of the presentations in the webinar. This yard design tool by the Alliance for Chesapeake Bay um, is a step-by-step. They walk you through looking at all of the um, setbacks and issues. Should I do a conservation landscaping or can I do a rain garden? All the way through plant selection and sizing. So this is a really in-depth step-by-step tool, this yard design tool by the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay. And I encourage everybody to go and take a look at that. If you like sort of a click through step-by-step guide, our Northern Virginia Soil and Water District has created this PDF, a rain garden design and construction guide. On our website, I think I see a link that Ashley included in the chat box if you wanted to click on that. Again, really in-depth, step-by-step. We can always, there's in the chat box some homeowners wanting more resources. So our offices, we provide technical guidance. So if homeowners do have questions about their own yard, maybe the suitability of their soil, an infiltration test, siding, where should I put this, all those different things, we are happy to help. Our inbox, email box, which is easiest, is conservationdistrict@fairfaxcounty.gov. And we can be reached that way to provide more in-depth one-on-one services, talking through your property and your yard. I see. Thanks, Ashley. You provided a lot of the great links that I had in there. I'm reading through the chat box, so if anybody has any questions that was unclear, feel free to chime in. We talked about infiltration rates, what sort of a low, medium, or fast rate. Downspouts, of course, can be put underground into the rain garden, maybe using a pop-up emitter, or they can just come out in the side of the slope, again, with a little rock material to dissipate that energy. Let's see. The infiltration tests, of course, super important to try and figure out. Of course, always call Miss Utility before you do that. Um, let's see. Technical assistance, including site visits or just via pictures and email. In this time of the COVID-19 virus, we are doing more primarily pictures, email, phone calls to homeowners to try and give them assistance. We have a number of folks on our technical team, so in talking with you, if they feel like a site visit is necessary to really understand your property, that can be an option that the technical staff member might decide to do that. So that might be an option that they um, can also suggest to you. But we're trying to do things a little bit more electronically and a little bit more remotely, but there is the possibility of a site visit as well. This resource slide, I know there's a lot of links up here. Ash has done a great job of including a lot of them. And again, this webinar is being recorded. You can also take a screenshot right now if that's helpful with a phone or just even on your computer to try and save these links for a later point in time if you want to revisit them. Is there anything else, Ashley, you think that I missed in the chat box, or if anybody has any questions about anything native plants, soils, do it yourself?
I think that this has been an amazing webinar, Maria. Thank you so much for being our speaker today. I think that we've heard from a lot of people who are interested in putting in rain gardens. If any of the viewers haven't seen it yet, June is Sustainable Garden Tour Month, and we have different sites from all over the county showcasing their front yard gardens, their rain gardens, their sustainable landscaping, and really great interactive videos for you to see some of what they're doing and see maybe what you can do at home. And I think that I've heard from a lot of people as I put together the garden tour that they were very interested in putting in a rain garden, but they didn't really know how to start. So I think this has been a really great place for everyone to get started and to use all of your amazing resources to learn more about rain gardens.
Thanks. That was great plug for the Sustainable Garden Tour. And there was one, I believe it was earlier this week or Sunday. Maybe you can remember. I think that it was about a 30-minute video that a woman did. She had a rain garden in her front yard, and she starts talking about the rain garden about minutes, I think 3 through 11, if you really want in depth about her rain garden in her yard. Do you know off the top of your head the title of that or what date that was if people want to look at the Sustainable Garden Tour? I forgot that link.
Yes, that was actually a tour called Our Gardens, Our Refuge, A Labor of Love, which was published on the 14th, so just a couple of days ago. And that homeowner spent a lot of time developing her gardens, but she did get a cost share grant from the Soil and Water Conservation District that allowed her to put in a rain garden, which she had wanted for some time. So you can see her walk through all the different stages of the garden, how it's grown over time, and particularly everything she had to do to put in that rain garden, particularly some challenges she may have faced or some other recommendations that she might have for that property. And it actually, just based on one of the comments, seems like that homeowner is here on the webinar today. So thanks for joining us, Karen.
Wonderful. Thanks for filling in that title. So again, you can see in real life how somebody did it. Thanks, Ashley, for also mentioning the um, Virginia Conservation Assistance Program. That's the cost share program Ashley was just talking about that homeowner engaged with our offices to do. I don't have a link on our resource page, but if you go to our website or just look up generally, the acronym is VCAP, or again, VCAP. So again, the Virginia Conservation Assistance Program. Um, Thanks. Someone in the chat provided the link to that. That's the overall link for the soil and water districts. Our webpage individually has got a little more in depth about how we apply. We open up for site visit requests once a year for homeowners to, and we prioritize them and it's got a wealth of knowledge about that program and all of those steps if you're interested in learning about that cost share program. Thanks for providing the direct link to our webpage, Ashley.
We actually just updated that today, so it does have information for the new fiscal year, which will be starting July 1st. And applications for site visit requests will be open on July 1st, and then they will close on August 19th. So that's definitely some time to learn about the program and potential projects that you could put in if you're interested. I think that that's almost all that we have, and we haven't gotten any more questions. So with that, I'll go ahead and end our webinar. Thank you everyone so much for joining us today. And Maria, thank you so much again for a very informative presentation that I think will help all of our viewers be more prepared to put in their own rain gardens.
Great. And as I said, our offices can best be contacted with questions at the email address conservationdistrict@fairfaxcounty.gov. It's the best way to get to us by phone, 703-324-1460.
Perfect. Thanks so much and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.